And we are live. Welcome to Olivia's Stories, ladies and gentlemen. I never knew that one mistake would lead to me divorcing my husband and making my husband hate me forever. I thought that the friendship I had with my husband's boss was never going to be the problem, but it later cost me a great loss because I lost my husband and also my best friend. My fellow Redditors, my name is Mary and I am 30 years old. I am also an event planner, and event planning has been my passion for so many years. The name of my husband is Gabriel, and he is 35 years old and he is an architect. Gabriel and I got married about 3 months ago, and it has been great. Gabriel and I met through a mutual friend, and it was love at first sight. Gabriel was very charming at first, and I really thought he was just doing so in order to get me, but I was very wrong. Anne is one of my best friends. I met her in college, and ever since we have been together through everything. It was Anne's birthday party in summer last year, and like every other year since college, she decided to throw her usual birthday parties. I knew she could always go all out for those parties, and I always supported her. It was like every other day I was having lunch with Anne when she brought up her party that was coming up. As usual, we discussed the details, and I looked forward to the party like always. On the day of Anne's birthday, I got ready to attend, and I dressed to impress like always. I got to the venue, and I wished my best friend a happy birthday. She asked if I should go with her to say hello to the guests, and I accepted. It was such a lovely evening. Few hours into the party, I was already feeling exhausted, and I went to meet Anne, who was across the room when I ran into someone. I quickly apologized and left. I met Anne, and I told her I was leaving, but she insisted I should still stay a little. We were speaking when a man joined us. Anne proceeded to exchange pleasantries, and I was left standing. Anne later introduced us, and I discovered it was the same guy I ran into earlier. I apologized again, and Anne told me all about him, saying he was the guy she had been telling me about. But I knew she was just trying to set us up because I didn't know anyone like that. Anne left me standing with Gabriel, a guy I didn't know at that point, and I was very mad at her, but I knew she meant well because I hadn't been in a relationship in a while. Gabriel and I got speaking, and he told me a lot, but himself, and I asked him why I never met him. Even when he was very close to my best friend, and he said that he normally sees me afar, but he didn't know if I was spoken for. I told him he could have just come up to me, but he never did until then. I told Gabriel I needed to leave because I had an event the next day. We didn't get to exchange numbers. I said my goodbyes to Anne, promising to meet up for lunch in a couple of days. The next day, I was booked for business because I had an event I was taking care of. I kept thinking about Gabriel because I had a very good evening with him. I knew some of the people at Anne's event, but his company was the best, and I later found out at that moment that I didn't get his number. I felt sad because I had thought maybe he didn't feel the same way. That's why he didn't ask for my number. I decided to just let it go and not worry over a guy who might not have any interest in me. The next day I met up with Anne and we talked about fashion like we always do, but she brought up Gabriel and I told her we were just talking at her event, that there was nothing more to it. And I also told her that it wasn't that serious, because if it were serious, he could have asked for my number, but he didn't. Anne was surprised, and she went on to talk about how I shouldn't just wait for the guy to ask what I should have just given him. Anne, between the two of us, is the most forward. She could always get any guy she wanted. She always went for whatever she wanted. Anne somehow got my phone and dialed Gabriel's number before I could say anything to her. Gabriel picked the phone, and I had no choice but to talk to him. I told him I was the one, and he was kind of surprised it was me because he wasn't expecting me to call, and I told him we never got around to exchanging numbers. We spoke for a few minutes, and he had me out for lunch, and I accepted. I ended the call, and I didn't know what to do with Anne. I felt embarrassed. I called him because I didn't want to look desperate. But like always, we laughed over it, and I told her I had lunch with him the next day. That evening, I went to see my father. It had been a while since I knew we were repairing our relationship, because for a long time, I never knew who my father was, and at some point I was able to find him, and I didn't know how to feel because I felt like he abandoned me. But instead, I discovered that he never knew I existed. He asked for a chance to be in my life, and I gave it to him. I didn't want to punish him for what he didn't know anything about. I had dinner with my dad, and he kept trying to be everything and more for me, and I appreciated it. I went home tired from a long day, and I slept off. The next day I went to work, and I met a couple who were planning to get married, and I was in awe. They were so in love, and I felt jealous because I wanted to have someone I could share my life with in that manner, but I didn't want to think too much into it because I usually overthink things and stress myself out. I finished with the couple and it was already lunchtime. Not long after that, Gabriel came to pick me up. He took me to my favorite restaurant. I didn't know how he knew, but I was sure it was the work of Anne. She had her name written all over it. Gabriel charmed me as usual, and we had a good time. He told me about how he had lost his family and how he had never been the same. I was feeling very sad for him because I knew what it felt like to not have any family. We finished our lunch, and Gabriel dropped me off, promising to see me later in the week. It had been a month since I last heard or spoke with Gabriel. I didn't understand why he could ghost me in such a way. I thought we were doing great. I tried to reach him a couple of times in that month, and he didn't respond. I concluded that maybe he wasn't into me as I was. I also thought maybe I was too forward. Few days later, Gabriel showed up at my store and told me he had been busy with work and he was sorry. I understood because I knew how work can be. We went out a few times, and in those times we became very close. We went out on a couple of dates, and he finally asked me out and I accepted. I was finally his girlfriend. I thought he took his time though because I was expecting it for a long time. Gabriel and I dated for some months and our relationship grew into something beautiful. I met some of his friends and it was really lovely. Anne kept going on and on about how she was the one who brought us together. But I never gave her the satisfaction because I had always said she never really introduced prior to that day, and we had been attending her parties for years. I kept teasing her about it and she loved it. Gabriel proposed to me a few months later and I panicked at some point. I didn't know what to say and Gabriel gave me some time to think about it. I appreciated it because he was not trying to rush me and I was happy. I talked to Anne and she explained to me how Gabriel loved me and he could do anything for me. She reassured me and that was everything I needed. I said yes to Gabriel the very next day and he was ecstatic. We planned our wedding and it was beautiful. I never felt so much happiness. My dad had worked me down the aisle and I had never seen him so proud. After the wedding, Gabriel had asked me to move in with him, but I didn't know what to say. I had told him that we should look for a place together and make payment together, but I changed my mind because I was very busy with work after the wedding, because I had taken some weeks off. But seeing that house hunting could be another problem added to my work schedule, I decided that we move in together. We started living together and things were going smoothly. We could wake up together, eat breakfast before going to work. We had our regular dinners with friends and family, and I always felt safe around Gabriel. He was almost everything I wanted and more. He would listen to me and solve any issue I had. I was in the store finishing up a meeting with my client when Gabriel came in. He had told me his boss was having his birthday celebration the next day. I was surprised he was just telling me, but he said that it was just planned and it was a surprise party for him. I told him I didn't know his boss because he was not at the wedding and he said he was out of town for work then. I decided to go with him because I didn't want Gabriel by himself. I thought to ask Anne to get me something to wear, and like always, she delivered and I loved it. The next day, I got ready with Gabriel and we went to the party. We got to the venue and it was packed. Gabriel introduced me to some people and we talked for a bit. Things were going smoothly and I excused myself to go to the restroom. I finished up and headed back to my surprise. The birthday boy had already walked in. I couldn't see him because a lot of people had gathered around him. I went out to call Gabriel saying I had to leave because it was getting late, but he insisted I see his boss before leaving. I accepted, and not long after he came to find me. We went together to meet his boss and say happy birthday to him, but he was busy with some important people and Gabriel asked me to wait a few minutes. We waited for an hour before we were allowed inside. At the moment, I was very pissed because I had to ask myself why he kept us waiting for that long. It wasn't fair no matter who he was. Few minutes later, we were asked to go in and see him. I was already pissed, but I made up my mind to just forget about it because of Gabriel. On getting inside, I received the shock of my life. I saw Ross, my ex-boyfriend, who left and didn't say goodbye. I couldn't believe that he was my husband's boss. I told myself I wasn't going to behave like I knew him because it had been so long, and I am already married, so Gabriel introduced us, and I could see the shock on his face too. He decided to play along with us, not knowing each other, which was fine with me, because I wasn't going to put Gabriel in the position where he had to feel his wife and his boss had history. We said happy birthday to him, and we left the office, and I kept wondering about how Ross was my husband's boss and how weird it was to see him again. The next day, my husband noticed my mood and he asked me about it, but I told him it was nothing. I wasn't going to tell him I had a kind of relationship with his boss. I went to work like usual, and I decided to take my mind off things and bury myself in some work. After a while, Anne came around and we talked about Ross. She was surprised about the dynamics, but I had to tell her not to mention anything to Gabriel, because at that point, I wasn't going to pursue anything with him. But my friend Anne warned me to stay away from Ross because I was married, and he was the one who had left me alone when we were still together. I took her advice because I wasn't about to destroy the marriage I had with Gabriel. A few weeks later, I was at home preparing dinner when Gabriel got back from work. We ate, and he had brought up this story of how we needed to attend their yearly gala organized by his company. I did want to go, but when he had told me I was going to be considered with organizing it, I was very happy because that could be a huge plus to my store. I was happy until he told me he had suggested it to his boss, and I had to go see him the next day to make some preparation, and of course ask him a few questions. I didn't want to lose the opportunity because of my old history with Ross. I made up my mind to go, and I thanked Gabriel wholeheartedly because it was a huge opportunity and he made it happen. I got ready the next day because I had an appointment with Gabriel's boss, so I had to ride to the office with my husband. We got there and he kept me waiting like usual, but I remembered I was only there for my store and I knew this event could put us on the map. I entered his office and we greeted each other and I got down to business, but he said he needed to attend a meeting and that we should start the meeting by lunchtime. I was very angry because I knew he was messing with me. I decided to tell my husband the latest development about how his boss wanted to have a private lunch with me to talk business. He didn't see anything wrong with that, and he had said I should be patient. I went back to the office and I got started with work because I knew after that lunch, I was going to be so angry. It was time for lunch and I wasn't feeling it because I was discouraged, and I knew it was just going to open old wounds. I got down to the restaurant where we were having lunch, and I saw that Ross was early for the first time since I met him. I sat down and we got to business. He had told me how he wanted the event to be, and I took every detail down. Ross kept talking about us, and I was feeling exhausted about it, and I made it clear to him he was the one who had left me. He told me he had a good reason, but honestly, I didn't want to hear it. But Ross was persistent, and he asked me to please hear him out, and I did. He had told me he was left with no other choice because he had to pick between me and his family. I know Ross loved his family a lot, but I didn't know why he had to pick. He refused to tell me, promising to say it on our next lunch together. But I had explained to him that I wasn't going to keep having lunch with him because I was married. But he told me it was a harmless lunch that my husband was aware of. A few days later, we started preparing for the event. It was a big event, and I needed more hands to help out. I employed more people, and it was moving smoothly. But I still had lunch with Ross, which I kept postponing, but I knew I had to get around to going because we were going over the last details of our arrangement. I went to lunch with Ross and we finished everything. He apologized about what happened a few years back, and I was happy because at least it was past us now. We can concentrate on the event. The day of the event came and everything was set. I went to the event with Gabriel and he was proud of what I had done with the place. Throughout the night, Ross kept staring at me and I kind of found it weird, and when he came over to talk to Gabriel, his hand kept brushing mine. At some point, I felt like he was flirting with me, which was not appropriate. A few weeks later, Ross showed up at my store telling me he wanted to take me out to thank me for the event I organized, and I respectfully declined, but he insisted. I went out with him, and it was fun for us to have reconnected after a very long time. It was fun while it lasted. Ross kept sending me flowers after that day, and it was very nice. We talked on the phone for a few minutes in the day, and most days he had said he wished he had come earlier before I got married. He still loved me, and he wanted to make up for lost time. I decided to give him a chance in order for him to try. We went out for a few dinners, but I didn't see it as something that could harm my husband. But I knew I was lying to him, and I decided to stop. I discussed it with Ross about us telling Gabriel about us knowing each other, but he had said no, that it could complete things at work, and he didn't want to lose his best employee over what we had. I told him since we hadn't done anything bad, we should come out to Gabriel, but he refused. From that moment, my secret relationship with Ross grew. We kept seeing each other, and I became too comfortable. I felt like at some point my husband had suspicions about my late-night dinners, but he had thought it was just work. It was like every other day when I met up with Ross, and he had told me I should be creating enough time for us. I had to tell him I was married, and it could be very bad for either of us should my husband find out that we had been seeing each other secretly. But Ross kept asking for more time with him, which I gave in. Looking back now, I regret my decision because it had created problems for me. My husband and I started having issues, all because I wasn't at home anymore. And most days I wasn't at the store either. But I had to lie to him that I was busy with different clients and they were taking my time. He believed me for some couple of weeks before Ross had gone out of town for a business trip. I wasn't happy because I found myself to be missing him. I made plans for Gabriel, and I should go out for dinner since we had been having issues for some weeks now. We reconnected and everything was okay before Ross returned. I went back to see him, and at some point we ran into Anne at a restaurant. I didn't know what to say because she had warned me to stay away from Ross, but I didn't listen to her. She pulled me aside and he told me I was making a big mistake going out with my husband's boss, but I didn't listen to her. I told her it was nothing. I went back to meet up with Ross, and I didn't know that Anne had already gone behind my back to call my husband to the restaurant. I didn't know Gabriel came in secretly and saw me and his boss together. Ross took me to his house, and we spent the night together. The next morning, I saw Ross sleeping naked beside me. I felt like I had committed a big sin because everything that Anne had said to me was true. I was going after someone who did not care about me, someone who had abandoned me. I quickly got ready and I went back home to my husband, planning to apologize to him and tell him everything that had happened. But I got home to see that Gabriel was very angry at me, and he already had the divorce papers signed. He didn't allow me to explain anything. He was very curious with me. I begged him to listen to me, but he said he could have considered forgiving me if I didn't sleep with his boss. I felt horrible because he kept guilt-tripping me, and I felt worse. Gabriel asked me to pack out of the house, and I did. I shouldn't have been deceived by Ross, who left me when I needed him, and when he discovered I was married, he came and ruined my marriage. Updates. Hello, guys. So I signed the divorce papers, and Gabriel and I are officially divorced. It was very exhausting. I was not happy because it took a great toll on me. I lost my husband due to my foolishness. I was happy in that marriage, and I knew that my husband loved me, but I went after someone who I wasn't sure of. I heard that Gabriel had resigned from work and he has started his own business. I was happy for him. And through everything that was happening, Anne had come clean to me that she was the one who sold me out to my husband. At first, I was very furious as to why she did that, but she said I was going to a place I wasn't going to come back from. I understand she was only doing that for me to see I was throwing away my marriage for someone who wasn't worth it. But looking back now, I wished it never destroyed my marriage. Ever since that night and everything that happened after Ross hasn't called me. I tried calling him a few times, but he ghosted me. That had made what I did even worse because I lost both sides. My relationship with Anne hasn't been the same ever since. I lost all contact with Gabriel. I am now staying with my father, and he has been very supportive. I couldn't have gone through this without his support.